Hello everyone, today we are on the Fine Art Asia and I want to just show you a bit of highlights. There is really a lot of to see, so this what I will show you is just a super small part, and I would encourage everyone to step by this weekend because it's not many such a great fairs coming to town. There's some new additions, new pavilions, which I will also show you in my video, but just come and see yourself. Hope to see you here during this beautiful weekend, and if not, I hope you will also enjoy the highlights. Thank you.
And we've been coming to Fine Art Asia since the very first edition in 2006. We see it grow into one of the finest exhibition of its type in the world, and certainly the finest in Asia. So we put this figure in the center here of at the entrance of our stand. This is a figure of an atlas, which is a very kind of Western, Roman, Hellenistic type of figure, but this comes actually from Gandhara, which is present-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. Is an area which in the first few century of the first few century AD was Buddhist, and so they created what is called Greco-Buddhist art, Gandhara art, which is a very strong influence from Hellenistic aesthetic. So you can see the figure is actually, the way they portray the figure, the way the facial expression, the hair, even the beard, the musculature is very much close to example of Hellenistic art, but the stone gives the way, it's a grey schist, typical of the area. And so it's interesting, this cross-cultural influence that happens in Asia throughout the millennium, in fact. This idea of exchange of ideas and exchange of style and aesthetics is very much rooted already in this period, which is the first, second century AD. Very large example, usually they're much smaller, these type of figures, so this is quite a spectacular piece to see at the fair. And then we have a number of bronzes and sculpture and objects from the Himalayas. I would like to point out these, which you might not immediately look at, but they're actually fairly unique door bosses. So they were attached to the doors of a temple in Tibet. These were probably 16th, 17th century. They're made of iron, extremely thick and heavy. So to forge such a piece would take a real skilled craftsman. It's much more difficult than casting in bronze. And then they've been overlaid in copper and silver, so to create this effect. They look like little monsters, but are actually protective figures, and they would be probably outside the door of a very secret room in a monastery. And so that's what they're protecting from evil spirits. Tibetan Buddhism, as some of you might know, has both fierce deity and peaceful deity, and the fierce deity are mostly protectors deity, and they're not our enemy, they're actually our friends. They're the one who help us to overcome ignorance and all our sins. And then maybe I can show you a couple of more things over here. I want to show you these gilt bronze. This is a portrait of a Tibetan monk. It dates from the 15th century. Was probably done, the monk probably lived, it's inscribed, so we know the name of the monk, and he lived a little early, lived in the 14th century. Was quite an important figure in Tibetan history. But you can see, even though the portrait was made maybe a century after he lived, there's still a lot of personal details and very much the facial feature of the Lama. The Lama in his older age are quite well delineated. Portraiture in Tibet, especially portraiture of monks, is extremely important because it represents really the lineage of the teaching, and so they are, by portraying the monk, you really are kind of paying homage to all the teaching of Buddhism. And so it's not just a portrait; it's really a symbol of something more meaningful. This is in particularly good condition. It's gilt copper. So the bronze was made with a copper alloy, and then it was gilt later on. and it's sealed with the original seal, so it would have been consecrated inside. It's never been opened. It's got a beautiful engraving at the bottom as well. Inscription runs both at the very beautifully done at the front, and there is also an inscription at the back. A real, a very fine example of this type of image from Tibet.
How to make it, maybe?
Okay, first I blow the glass to the funnel shape, then break it into
Or
the
like a
piece.
big good.
Blow the foam with thick glass, then break it into the piece. After that, I collect them together and heat in the special kiln. After that, like this, I blow another glass with the sometimes gold. Can I see? Can I see the
Yes.
gold inside?
I'm Lucy Kitchener and I'm the Managing Director of Masterpiece London. Masterpiece is an art fair which was launched 10 years ago and takes place at the Royal Hospital in Chelsea every June. It is a cross-collecting fair. So for us we have a very, very important philosophy about bringing together disciplines spanning jewellery, works of art, furniture, design, and we also span history. So we have 6,000 years of art in the fair in London. We think it's very important to show these things together because we believe there is a very strong narrative that goes from the past to today and then looks forward to the future. We have been working with Andy Hay in Fine Art Asia since 2013 when we brought a very small selection of pieces to his fair. Last summer he came to London and was able to show Asian treasures at Masterpiece in London to a more European and international audience. And we are delighted to be here for the first time with real scale at Fine Art Asia this October. We have a pavilion and we have 15 of our galleries represented, which is a relatively small amount. We have 160 galleries in London from all over the world. We have 15 of them represented here with 35 works of art spanning 2,000 years. We have paintings from Canaletto and Cézanne to modern masterpieces like Bridget Riley, Sam Francis, Fontana and Morandi. Extraordinary collection. I think the important thing for us is we believe in showing a huge variety of pieces curated together so that when you come to one of our fairs you see things you don't expect to see. I think that's very exciting. We think it's an opportunity to see things that you're not expecting to see and to learn, and also for us being here is incredibly important because we're here to learn as well as to showcase what we have.
It's absolutely great, and I'm so delighted to see Masterpiece in Hong Kong. So are you planning to expand? Are you planning to bring even more galleries next year?
Yes, so this is in Masterpiece's first international expansion, and I think we've chose very deliberately to be in Hong Kong. We're very excited to be here. You know, we are an international fair, and I think Hong Kong is a fantastic, vibrant international city with a great art scene. So yes, we are here in a relatively small way now, and our intention will be to bring back galleries with their own booths in 2020, but still very much within the Fine Art Asia.
Amazing. And what is your favorite piece this year?
That's like asking who your favorite child is.
I know.
I don't think you could. I think what I love is the way that pieces are put together that are so different. So you can have, we have some chairs from the 1750s that they're called the dragon chairs. They were commissioned specifically for Lulworth Castle, and they actually have a chinoiserie reference in the design of them, which shows that this idea of cross-cultural ideas is not new. It's 250 years old at least, because I think there was a lot of influence in furniture design, in British furniture design at that point. And they're sitting in the pavilion, and above them is Poinsettias by Andy Warhol, which were artworks he often made and gave to friends as Christmas gifts. So I think that the fact they sit together, they both look fabulous apart and together, shows very much what Masterpiece is all about. But I definitely couldn't have a favourite.
You'll see works from classical antiquity to contemporary, through all different disciplines. So you'll see furniture, you'll see sculpture, you'll see illuminated manuscripts, you'll see old master pictures, you'll see contemporary design, contemporary art, and so on. This for me is a really good lead-in because this bust is Roman. So it's a classical bust. It's made at two different periods, which may seem odd. The head itself is 1st century AD, and the bust, the clowns, is 2nd century AD. And that may seem a little disturbing and worrying, perhaps.
See how he's put together over there.
But the reason why is when these works were rediscovered in the 18th century, they were being dug up in excavations in and around Rome. And the head would have been found in one place and the bust in another place. And there was this tremendous appetite in the sort of second half of the 18th century in Italy to feed the collecting habits of the English grand tourists who were visiting Europe with new fortunes, building new houses back home, and this I was going to say greed, that's perhaps not the right word, but greed for acquiring works with which to furnish their houses. And so taste changes, and it would be different today. But in the 18th century, you didn't just want to buy a head, you wanted the bust as well. If you had a torso, you'd want the arms and the legs. So there were a number of sculptors who had dealerships in Rome who acquired ancient pieces like this, and they stuck two ancient pieces together to make a whole. And they would sometimes carve on, not in this case, but they would sometimes carve contemporary pieces to add to make a complete figure. And so this really encapsulates a sort of a change of taste and a way of collecting. And the people, the English particularly, I mean there were obviously other grand tourists, but it was very much an English preoccupation, were looking at a wide range of works. They were buying ancient things like this, but they were also buying works that would have been contemporary at the time, like the Canaletto over here. Whilst you don't like the Canaletto, you can tell us about it. Look, from my point of view, I mean, Canaletto, but you probably know more familiar with the rather more sort of photographic, sort of postcardy views of Venice and so on, which were churned out literally for the English grand tourist, so the person buying those things, to take home and furnish their houses with. What I like with this one, although it's quite late, Canaletto, it has the flavour of an early one. It's so much freer and looser and more vibrant and so on.
And it was actually made from an etching. So there was an etching that he then copied into this painting. And it incorporates, hence the scale, because Canaletto is quite large. And a lot of times painted from the open air, you know, or from sketches from the open air. This literally was painted from an etching previously. So it's very, very delicate, and I like it for Canaletto, because I'm not a big Canaletto fan, to be honest, because it is so intimate and it's so beautifully rendered. You know, it has his handling of the work very well, of the paint, but in a very concise and small presentation. So it's it grows on you.
It's also it's also in actually beautiful condition.
Yeah.
If you come up and look closely, you'll see on these little dots of paint, little pinpricks of paint that really animate the whole scene.
It's very delicate.
Wonderful light.
And again, it has that kind of lovely light. So we're going to go from Canaletto over to Mr. Cézanne. This is 1876, so it's a bit later than the Canaletto. And if you've gone to any museums, you might see an artist named Paul Cézanne, who's very famous and who is considered in a lot of ways and often called the father of modernism. And this is a good, very small and early kind of example of Cézanne. And why it's called that. So when you look at it, you can see that it is a landscape, okay, with a sort of mythical figure with holding a jar in her head. But it's painted in the south of France, very close to Paul Cézanne's family's estate. He had left Paris because he wasn't well received there at that time. And he actually left his daughter and son in Paris and went home to paint. And this is one of the small sketches that he did. But what's really intriguing about this little wonderful gem is that you can see the beginning of why we call him the father of modernism. If you look at this painting, you'll think about Cézanne as being able to deconstruct a landscape. In other words, he would look at real landscape or the real world, and he would see it in geometric form or the composition. And in this, and thus he would paint it so. So much like the Canaletto, which is a picture of a landscape, for here, he's broken it down into these sections. So see this horizontal section, horizontal section, horizontal section, horizontal section. Then in order to balance the horizontal sections, you see these verticals, verticals, vertical. So now we have a center and focus on our painting. And then he makes a diagonal here with these figures leading in there to make some dynamic aspect to the painting or tension. And these are these very traditional ways that even Renaissance painters used to make a canvas, but they become later on what his painting's about. And then artists from him on down in time take away the landscape and use that for construction and the idea of seeing reality in those geometric forms. So now it's a great example of why we call him the father of modernism. Lucio Fontana was a painter from Italy. He was originally a ceramicist. So if you think about how he treats the surface of the canvas, it's almost like how you treat the surface of a vase or clay. You know, it's almost like a slab. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to penetrate that canvas. So much like Cézanne wants you to go into that painting to see a world, he wants you to go into, get out of the world and go into the sublime or into the abyss or into the unknowing. And so he splits his canvas, puts a black felt behind it so that when you look at it, you really don't know what mystery you're going to find once you leave our world and enter the world of the canvas. This is an early work from the 1959-1960, and it's round because there were other examples very similar in this series of work called the constellations. It's called quanta, and that's the constellations. And what he would suggest was that a viewer who would buy the painting would buy more than one, and that they would be little worlds like little stars to make a constellation. And the gold, which is unusual for him, because usually they're black or red or white and very matte and square, these earlier works really refer to the gold as think of it as the sun or the sublime, or the idea of a gilded gold on a religious painting. So everything that different artists use, all the way they paint, the what they paint, how they paint, really reflects something other than what you see as a picture, because it reflects something that's deeper and has more of a philosophical or metaphysical meaning. Then we can go in that way of thinking, we can go to somebody like Morandi, who this is a piece from the 60s as well. We're very big on the 60s lately. 1961 was a big year on the food. But if you come stand this way in front of this painting, you can see that Morandi painted actually still lives, but he always painted still lives really of these series of jars that he had and that he kept in his studio, that he actually painted the jars themselves. So they didn't have a reflection, they were flat. Because his interest was not so much in making you look like that was the actual jar. It was the jar was a metaphor for sort of a meditative aspect of focusing on something. And you see that they're quite flat, they're almost geometric, like we were talking about Cézanne. And what's interesting in the painting is not so much the surface, but the edges, where one leads up against another. So it's almost like if you were just a person here by yourself, and then all of a sudden you're in comparison with these other two people, you're an ensemble. You compare the edge of your arm with the edge of your arm. That's very similar to what he's done here. So art is always a metaphor for something that's deeper and that is more philosophical. It's the idea that it represents something that is not tangible made tangible. Morandi also always uses his, and frequently, not always, but most of the time, uses his name. And if you come very close, you can see it's written here Morandi, but it's in the same color as that bottom half of the canvas, because he wants you to focus right on the center of that painting, and it stands for himself as well. But he a lot of times would take the idea of an animal, and then he would create a bench out of it or a chair out of it, and then slowly they became sculptures onto themselves. But they're parts of a whole, so they're fantastic. They're fantasy. And so we have this head of the cabbage on these chicken legs, okay? But that too has a meaning of what does it be to a cabbage head, okay? Walking on chicken feet, and how do we walk in the world that way, sort of not thinking, but with lots of leaves. So there's this meaning or metaphor of what the work is about, as well as the craft here. This is beautifully crafted. Think of all of the delicacy of crafting these outer leaves, this inner area, these chicken feet, and putting them together with this wonderful patina, bronze patina. And then again, looking at this metaphor of using these symbols and these animals and vegetables, we look at Mr. Gorilla over here, who has this very self-satisfied smile on his face. This is also by Lalande and his partner, attributed to Francois. And in this case, you know how we all look at the gorilla? Well, that gorilla is looking at you. And that gorilla has that same kind of pleasurable smile of looking at you rather than you looking at him or her, as the case may be. So although Lalande is humorous, it's also very deep and has a lot of humanity to it. Then we want to come maybe to this 1988 Kusama work. So this is a fairly early work of Kusama's, and you can see it's actually much flatter than her later work in the Infinity Nets. It's called Passage of the Wind, and when you look into it, you can see that there's not the same air as what we'll see in Richter over there, but you can see this division of this flattened kind of space where she really talks about these passages of letting something breathe between these vines. I call them vines in the air. And if you know her work at all, she makes these wonderful mirrored installations, and I find this work very akin to that, the idea of something all over coming at you from all directions. I get the same sensation just from this very small little work. So as flat as this can be, let's go back over here.
They're from the Qing dynasty. They're made of silk and gold, and they have a little story between each part of the planks that it's steps to a certain place in Kowloon. And then they'll be having their own, the first Chinese museum in Italy opening
in 3 months' time. So they're really excited about it. And yeah, so they feel that the carpet speaks for themselves. So please do go in and explore. All the carpets are, made of